Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest event by CURA, the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis. I am Harvey Miller. I am a professor of geography and city regional planning and director of CURA. And I welcome you to today's event on food security and healthy communities. I'd just like to go over some of the events we have the rest of spring 2020. A lot of them are along these themes of food security and healthy communities, but we have other things going on as well. On January 30th, we'll have an introduction to web mapping with ArcGIS Online. That's a workshop from 3 to 4 in the Research Commons, which is the 3rd floor of the 18th Street Library. And again, that's January 30th. February 7th, Dr. Samina Raja from University of Buffalo, who's been described as a global rock star in this area. She'll be here giving a talk here in Thompson Library at 12 o'clock, again on February 7th. February 13th is Coffee with CURA. That's our once a semester open house. We'll have bagels, we'll have pastries, we'll have caffeine. Come by and just chat with us. See what's going on in CURA. Tell us what's going on in your research and education and surrounding urban issues. And let's see what we can work out together. February 26th, boy, February is a busy month for us. February 26th, another presentation, GIS and mapping at Ohio State. Is there an app for that? And that will be at the Research Commons again, 3rd floor, 18th Street Library, 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. And then finally, continuing in this theme of food security and healthy communities, on March 6th, we'll have a panel discussion on food security and healthy communities, what's happening in Ohio. And we'll have panelists from the Red-All Green Partnership in Cleveland, the Greater Cincinnati Regional Food Policy Council, the University of Cincinnati, and the United Way of the Greater Dayton area. So we're going to hear from all around the state and what's going on with respect to food security and creating healthier communities in the cities of Ohio. So go to our website, cura.osu.edu. You can find all these events there. You can sign up for our newsletter, which you don't want to miss because we're always doing great things here in CURA. You can also like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and that way you'll never miss all the wonderful events we have going on here at the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis at Ohio State. So today we'll start with our panel discussion, which is focused on what's happening in Central Ohio surrounding food security and healthy communities. And we have a great panel here of people from Ohio State and beyond here working in the local community. And I'm going to introduce them in the order in which their slides are stacked up, so that's the order in which they'll speak. The first person to speak will be Brian Estabrook. He's a food service planner who focuses on improving the well-being of people and their communities by co-creating a sustainable, equitable, and resilient local food system that benefits all people. As food systems planner for Franklin County, Brian develops the network and catalyzes the infrastructure required to ensure successful implementation of the Columbus and Franklin County Local Food Action Plan. Brian, thanks for being here. Our second speaker will be Cheryl Graffanino. She's the Local Food System Strategies Coordinator for the City of Columbus Public Health Department. She's a registered dietitian who joined Columbus Public Health in 2009 after 15 years designing, implementing, and evaluating adult weight management interventions. In her role at Columbus Public Health, she's responsible for identifying and connecting innovative efforts to improve food access in Columbus neighborhoods, especially those most affected by health disparities. Thanks for being here, Cheryl. Third will be Karima Samadi, sorry about that. Karima has engaged in food systems work for over 10 years in various programs ranging from child obesity prevention to agricultural education. Currently, she is the Prosper Prevention Coordinator for OSU Extension. Prosper, which stands for Promoting School Community University Partnerships to Enhance Resilience, is a delivery system that facilitates sustained quality delivery of evidence-based programs that reduce risky youth behaviors, enhance positive youth development, and strengthen families. Karima is the co-chair of the Franklin County Local Food Council here in Columbus. And then finally, Dr. Kareem Usher. Dr. Kareem Usher is an assistant professor of city regional planning in the Knowlton School. His research interests focus on urban food systems, and he engages in the topic at the intersection of food access, social justice, regional governance, and community economic development. Dr. Usher is currently leading a project in the South Linden neighborhood of Columbus that aims to develop a food processing hub that would provide employment for previously incarcerated persons while supporting Ohio State University's efforts to increase the amount of local and sustainable food served to its students. So as you can see, this is really a terrific panel. We're glad you took time to be with us today. And we'll start with the opening remarks from Brian.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that introduction. And hello, everybody. Everybody hear me all right? Okay, good. So my name is Brian Estabrook, and I'm a food systems planner with Franklin County. I work for Franklin County Economic Development and Planning specifically, right here in Franklin County, which is where you're sitting. Work on implementation of the local food action plan, along with my colleague Cheryl, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. And that local food action plan is a collaborative effort between the City of Columbus and Franklin County. You can kind of see that up here on the screen. I'm also part of a city-county local food team, which includes Cheryl, who you'll be hearing from. The local food team works together across city and county lines to implement that local food action plan, which is a very unique kind of organization. As far as I know, there's only one other plan that has an explicit city-county relationship, and that's Santa Fe. So this is a very unique kind of groundbreaking approach right here in Central Ohio. The vision of the local food action plan is a fair and sustainable food system that benefits our economy, our environment, and all people. And by the way, anytime you want to learn more about the local food action plan, columbus.gov/LFAP is that information. I have some business cards with that website on it as well. But one of the unique facets you can see about the local food action plan through the vision here is that it's looking at food through multiple lenses. You have the idea of public health, community health, individual health. You have the idea of economic development. And then you're thinking about the environment, sustainability. These are very different kinds of lenses, and sometimes it's challenging to look at food and approach food challenges through multiple lenses at one time. But I think that's what we need to be moving toward. The goals of the local food action plan, really quickly, there are 4 goals. The first one, goal A, is about enhancing coordination and communication within the food system. Goal B is around food security issues, which is one of the reasons why we're here. Improving access to an education about healthy food, local food, and affordable food. Goal C is around increasing the role of food in economic development. And then goal D is focused on the issue of food waste, prevention, reduction, reuse of food waste. So I want to talk a little bit in my opening remarks here about about how we should think about food access and food security. I want to ask us to zoom out a little bit. I think that the right approach when thinking about the issue of food is to think about it through the lens of the social determinants of health. Is anybody familiar with the social determinants of health in this room? Okay, I see several hands. So the social determinants of health are interrelated domains of life that have a direct influence on health outcomes. So these domains include some of the ones you see up here: economic stability, housing, education, environment, transportation, civic participation. And this particular framing of the social determinants of health was actually developed right here in Franklin County by Franklin County Public Health. So this is something that our local health department operates off of. It's important to know that these domains are not siloed. They're interrelated. They impact each other. They represent where people live, work, learn, and play, and all of the processes, policies, and infrastructure, whether that's physical, social, civic infrastructure, that can encourage or can hinder human flourishing. And so this is how communities get healthy or lose health. And so we need to think about that really carefully. And a healthy food system, from my perspective, is a necessary but insufficient condition for the health and vitality of communities. So if we focus in too much on food, then we miss the broader story, the complexity of how health operates in communities. It's certainly one of the domains that impact health, but we need an integrated transdisciplinary approach in order to impact it. So one of the things I like to say is that food problems do not necessitate food solutions. But what I mean by that is you might see a food security challenge, you might see an economic development challenge that's related to food, you might look and say people can't afford to go to the grocery store. You might question then is, well, is the problem actually something that we can address through a food-based avenue? Or is this a poverty issue? Is this actually a living wage issue? Is this a housing issue? And so this gives us a lens through which to ask those questions. Finally, this is the public participation spectrum from the International Association of Public Participation, or IAP2. And it looks at the role of the public in decision-making processes. And the reason why I put this up here is because I think it's important that we spend time talking about more than just policy and programmatic interventions and talk about process. And if we don't talk about decision-making processes, then we won't ever get to the point of talking about power. And I think power is a really, really important thing that we need to grapple with here. Who has the power? Who doesn't have the power? Who's at the table? Who's not at the table? Who constructed the table in the first place? Who sets the agenda? Who makes the decision? Who's most impacted by what's going on? And also who has barriers to participate in the first place? And so this spectrum essentially goes from the least input by the public on the left, all the way to the right, the most impact. And I work for local government, so I can tell you that even the best local government interventions almost never go past involve, which is right there in the middle. We're not getting over to collaborate in power spaces. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's the structure of how local government works, it's the politics, it's a lot of stuff. But the point is that even the best local government projects aren't getting there. And the worst are staying over in form of consult, where they're coming in and saying, we're doing X, and you just have to deal with it. So we need to think about, we need to have a renewed focus on these questions of who's at the table, who has the power, who doesn't, how is it exercised, and to whose benefit does the power redound. Addressing issues of food security and these broader interrelated challenges posed by the social determinants of health will require effective process, in addition to effective policies and programs. So I think it's important to frame that question. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Cheryl.
Thank you, Brian. And I'm going to start with the same slide again, just to kind of reiterate that Brian and I work on the same project, but from different perspectives to some extent. So one of the things that I think is really important, and I want to kind of share, is to take the context that Brian just set and kind of share with you some of the boots on the ground. So what does all this mean in a neighborhood in the city of Columbus? And I kind of want to start this frame with some conversation around when we talk about food security and the things that we were looking to solve as we developed the local food action plan. In 2014, when this planning process kicked off, the first thing that we recognized extremely clearly and really acknowledged was that Columbus and Franklin County has an extremely robust and very effective emergency food system. And our emergency food system did not need to be recreated. And so when we talk about food security, oftentimes people's first thought is our food pantry system, our food bank system, and those types of things. And we are very fortunate in the city of Columbus that we have a very strong system for that. And I see some of my colleagues from Mid-Ohio in the back of the room. So hi, all of you. So let me acknowledge first that. But the need for emergency feeding is rooted in a food system that's not working. It's rooted in a food system that not everyone in our community can participate in. And so we knew that our focus had to be on trying to find solutions to the food system that left people without physical access or without financial access. And so, as you'll see with the local food action plan, it is very focused in that first goal on coordinating and collaborating and working well with the emergency food system. But you'll notice if you read our plan that a lot of the focus is not on the emergency food system as much as it is on the other pieces of access where people get their food. Because when you look at how people access food, regardless of your income level, even in our lowest income levels, very few people rely entirely on the emergency food system. And people who are food insecure are often relying on both our retail food system as well as our emergency food system. So those two things have to work together. So our focus and emphasis is very much on the other piece of the food system where people access their food. So with that in mind, just briefly, I'll share with you again, Brian and I are two pieces of a three-person team, and we also have a colleague who's still back at Columbus Public Health today, and she stayed dry, and that's Jaleesa Dawkins, and so she works with us as well and is very involved in the local food council. And so once we finish the plan and this whole city and county interaction, and with the intent of how do we begin to move through that spectrum that Brian shared with you on community involvement, thanks to Jill Clark and a napkin at lunch, or it might have been a coffee meeting, we came up with this implementation structure that's actually been working fairly effectively for us. And so at the center of this implementation structure, you're going to see that you have our local food team. And it is also somewhat unusual in a city and county to have quite as many paid city and county government positions that are focused on the food system. It happens, but we are among a small group. Then we are very tightly connected to our local food board, which is a board of grass tops, tree tops in many of our organizations. Matt Habash from Mid-Ohio Food Bank. You'll see LaCory Meadows, who's the director of extension for Franklin County. So we have a 12-member board who are folks who have access to the political, social, physical, financial capital to make change, so that they're engaged and can help us move things forward. But again, what we don't want to do is put ourselves in a situation where they're deciding what needs to be done in a neighborhood and moving it forward. So we recognize the need for maintaining that relationship with our legislative sponsors. So both Commissioner John O'Grady and Councilmember Priscilla Tyson are very actively involved in the implementation. They both attended our board meeting this last month. And then we also have the benefit of our Franklin County Local Food Council, which is really our community engagement arm. They are our grassroots people in the neighborhood. They're helping us stay connected and moving those things forward. And so as actions begin to be implemented, those tools work together to bring together stakeholders to form project teams. These are ad hoc teams who help us actually figure out how to do what needs to be done in our community. So just to give you some examples of what some of those things look like. So one of the things that's probably our splashiest example, but really is just one piece of a bigger effort, is the Linden Farmers Market. Did any of you visit the Linden Farmers Market? Has anybody been there? Good, I've got more hands than I thought I would, so good. So the Linden Farmers Market, when the last full retail grocery store in the Linden community closed, there was a reaction from the community. And we knew that we had a strong partnership with Mid-Ohio Food Bank that can help us really meet the emergency needs. But what really came out of the community conversations was a continued frustration with the lack of economic investment. It was one more example of economic disinvestment in their community. And so at that time, we were working with a group of folks to begin trying to figure out how to help our farmers markets network, collaborate, work together rather than compete with one another, both for customers and for producers. And so that group of people just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right folks from Linden to be able to say, hey, there's a real opportunity for a successful farmers market in Linden on Sundays afternoons. And here's why. Linden is home to 50 congregations up and down Cleveland Avenue. So everybody wants to start a farmer's market and assume it's going to be the draw that's going to bring everybody to the neighborhood. You actually have to have an existing set of people ready to shop. And this just presented a really unique opportunity. With this, more than this last season, which was the second season, more than 60% of the vendors were Linden resident or Linden-based businesses. Let me rephrase that. I get my statistics backwards. 60% of them were minority or women-owned businesses, and about 30 to 40% of them were Linden-based businesses, which was very much the intent. And so as you look at this, this is one where we began to move a little further in that spectrum where we had our strong community collaboration. And again, but that was the kind of big outward-facing lots of press that was really part of this bigger effort to bring our farmers markets together and bring them to really start to bring food available to our community partners, increase the demand for food that's grown in our region. And the first step in this process was they earned the Ohio Farmers Market Network earned a Farmers Market Promotion Program grant through the USDA. That process, one of the things they did was establish a baseline measure, and they identified that the farmers markets in Franklin County and the surrounding counties plus Fayette, that the general economic benefit of those farmers markets in a typical season was about $6.2 million. Now, what I can get the attention of now, as Brian can attest to, is I can get the attention of our development departments. Because up until now, they see those as kind of, these are nice little community events, they're great, they don't see the economic benefit. In the city of Columbus alone, we generate about $1.5 million in economic activity with the 8 to 10 farmers markets that operate in the city of Columbus. So these are things that Linden was a response, an opportunity, a way for us to see how to do these things in a neighborhood, how to partner with the neighborhood. But it was part of this bigger effort to begin to look at that. The second thing is we had a wonderful opportunity then to fund some additional services through Ohio Farmers Market Network, and one of our certified market managers was hired to actually go to all of the markets in the city of Columbus and provide the same kind of level of technical assistance and help that were provided for Linden. And then another example of this type of work is the farm to school efforts. So in the last few years, Columbus City Schools has launched a significant farm to school program called Ohio Days. And in the span of 3 years, Columbus City Schools went from not knowing how much food they bought that was grown, raised, and or processed in Ohio, to spending more than 21% of their budget, their food budget, on food grown, raised, and or processed in Ohio. And now an additional 5 districts in the Franklin County region, there's 15 altogether. Is that right, Carol? 14 or 15, close to that. Have now joined this process as well. So these are all examples of trying to make these bigger systematic changes, because when we can start to increase the demand, we can start to increase the production, that creates economic opportunity, and we're getting better food into our neighborhoods as well. So I'll turn this over to Karima. I probably went over my time. Sorry. No, you're fine. I know we're tight on time, so I'll try to speak as well.
All right. So I always try to start, got a little preview, my intro with talking about extension. How many of you are familiar with what extension is in the room? Okay, so I won't spend too much time on this, but a nice little history facts there for all you history buffs. So just talking about the connection to food as it relates to extension goes way far back. Some of our nutrition work also dates back to 50s, 60s, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about nutrition education as well. Okay, so also I just want to recognize the knowledge in the room, because I feel like I'm at my wedding and I'm seeing all my friends and people I've worked with. And students in the room too. If I often am approached by students, sorry about the auto fans, who are interested in working in food insecurity. If you just turn to your neighbor, someone sitting next to you might have an intro to that. But although I have a degree in nutrition, my intro to food and agriculture was actually working on a farm. This was post-recession Cincinnati. Was in a dietetic internship program, realized I didn't like the clinical world, and quit my internship. So students, don't do that. Don't quit your internship during the economic recession. But got to, this is garlic harvesting at Gorman Heritage Farm. Also was a cook at a homeless shelter, 2008 in northern Kentucky, so had to make 3 meals a day for 45 women and children on a budget of $1 per person per meal. So that was my real introduction to living food insecure and making it work. And that kind of led me to my work with Extension as an FNEP program assistant in Greene County, Ohio. So teaching low-income, limited resource families how to make healthy meals on a budget. I might skip over this, sorry, for anyone who's interested in theory. During that time, I earned my master's in public health degree, and then had an opportunity to work with a project called Heal Maps with my colleague, Dr. Dan Remley. He's a state specialist for food, nutrition, and wellness, works at Piketon, OSU South Centers in Pike County. This is, in short, food mapping. So you can see the acronym there. This is methodology that's borrowed from Oregon State University, and actually my colleague Kareem Usher here was also part of the team that brought it to Ohio State and piloted it in Butler County, Ohio. So these are just pictures that correspond with the process, but essentially we're talking about community-based participatory research using GPS and Garmin units, geolocating, working with people who are experiencing food insecurity and asking them to pretty much document their food experience in their community. So I know Brian earlier mentioned how food problems don't always equate food solutions. That's something we learned through the HEAL Maps process. And in fact, on the south side of Columbus here, something that our community researchers uncovered was of course, like Cheryl mentioned, we had a great emergency food system, but sidewalks and crosswalks were dangerous. So actually walking to access food was dangerous. And so and also racism. So, you talk about the barriers to food insecurity. They can be physical, they can be financial, they can be social. So discrimination that people experienced when they were in corner shops, trying to get food for their families. So lots of things there. I was told this is not a presentation, this is just an intro. So the HEAL Maps conversation, if anyone's interested, I'll share with you our story maps that we developed. This work is still going on. In fact, how I was introduced to a lot of my colleagues in the room was through FEAST, Food Mapping for Empowerment and Action for Sustainable Transformation. Sorry guys, it's distracting. So a collaborative of about 10 to 13 departments and colleges on campus, as well as community partners. Basically, there was a lot of people operating in this space. So Michelle Kaiser from College of Social Work really kicked it off with her food mapping work, and so we were building on that. HEAL Maps is a bit more qualitative, so you can think of it as like a quick and dirty needs assessment. Okay, we'll go ahead and advance to the next slide here. Other work I engaged with was Voices for Food. This was an USDA AFRI grant, multi-year, about 6-year, multi-million-dollar, 6 other institutions, land-grant institutions and their extension offices, looking at rural food insecurity. So there's a map here in counties that we worked with. It was a quasi-experimental design where we had comparison communities as well as our control communities. And we looked at not just food insecurity and food pantries specifically, but also working through the socio-ecological model. What's it like to engage with food councils? What's it like to have a community coach and walk you through addressing some of the food systems issues in your community? So we might get into talking about rural food insecurity here in a bit, but that project is still going on, and there's a scorecard that was developed for food pantries and food councils from that project. Cheryl already talked about the food council, so I won't spend too much time, but I did find a picture with a few of us in there. Jaleesa, as she mentioned, Cheryl's in there, and Brian, I think, is in there as well. But if you're interested in engaging in this, we meet every third Wednesday of the month at Columbus Public Health from 4:30 to 6, and I put the website there as well. But yeah, come meet with us afterwards if you want to be part of a convening group of people who work in all sectors of the food system. Lastly, Buckeye Food Alliance, I want to recognize my colleague Nick Fowler here. This was started by students in Lincoln Tower, there was an Office of Student Wellness had done a survey that found that 15% of Ohio State students were food insecure. We think that number is a little off. The national average for campus food insecurity is closer to 20. So hopefully we do another more comprehensive survey in the future. But the food pantry, the original location is still there in Lincoln Tower, and just had a grand opening a couple weeks ago at St. Stephen's over there on Woodruff, so sharing space there. But I sit on the board for Buckeye Food Alliance and have been really proud of the advances that we've made here in the last few years. I think that might be it. This is a word map from one of our qualitative projects there, but I'll pass it over to Kareem now.
Good afternoon, Kareem Usher, Assistant Professor of City and Regional Planning at Milton School. I think two major points sort of drive my research. Just sort of paraphrasing one of my favorite philosophers is that since injustice exists in the world, we're in some part implicit in that, and we're called to work together to eradicate that. And also just sort of my journey through life at this point, I've used this opportunity here at Ohio State and privileges that I've received along the way to dedicate my life to reducing human suffering to the extent that I can. My portal into that is urban food systems. So I sort of however, other pieces can also be hung onto that. So I've been doing work in Linden, up in Mansfield, and also my native country of Belize, where I do some work with indigenous farming and Maya communities there. As the panelists have mentioned, this space is very broad, and in Linden, for example, the work I'm doing there is how do we address food from an employment perspective, creating jobs, hopefully, and again, thinking long term. As an urban planner, I look at human settlements, towns, villages, cities, mega cities, regions, as sort of an organism. And so for me, the entire city of Columbus is this organism. What's the importance of food? What does it look like at the neighborhood level in people's lives? And that's sort of the approach that facet in which I enter the space.
Yeah. Thanks for, I was just writing down a good question when I was caught short. Okay, thank you for your opening remarks. Very interesting to see what's happening both here, in Ohio State and also in the community. So let me start off, we're going to open it up for questions from the audience, but let me start off with a couple of questions of my own. I wonder if you can just convey to the audience, and I'm sure a lot of people are aware of issues surrounding food security here in Central Ohio, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about who are the people being affected by food insecurity? Who would like to jump in?
Well, I'll jump in. So food insecurity is as we've discussed, it is an intrinsic and it's not consistent. It's not like you are food insecure on the 1st of January and you're going to be food insecure the entire 365 days of 2020. You can find yourself making ends meet, having enough money to buy food, and one critical incident in your life. A child becomes ill and you've got 2 or 3 medical bills that you didn't expect. The car breaks down, whatever it may be. And for many families, the first thing that happens is that your food budget gets cut. That's the place where there's oftentimes the flex in the budget. I think the other thing that is really important from the work that we do as well is that sometimes I think the forgotten population affected by food insecurity are those who earn just enough to not qualify for any services. They earn more than qualifying for SNAP, for what used to be known as the food stamps. They earn too much for their children to get free lunch at school. They earn too much to get WIC. And maybe earn just enough to not be able to qualify for a traditional pantry model. There are a number of services that are happening in the community that are trying to serve that, but for many of those folks in the population, we also are seeing those folks who just earn just enough to not be able to access the services that are set up for that. That would be my kind of perception on that.
Scared to try that mic. And that was an excellent way to encapsulate how sometimes it's situational and sometimes there may be some generational food insecurity going on as well. Just thought I'd throw out the USDA definition, the household level economic and social condition of limited or uncertain access to adequate food. And then sometimes they also throw in their lack of consistent access to enough food for an active, healthy lifestyle. So it can be relative depending on your population. The populations that are most affected, your senior citizens, children, rural communities, as I have mentioned, African Americans, Latinx communities, veterans, new Americans, college students, your LGBT community, people with disabilities. So not only low-income, limited resource, but people who might often be discriminated as well. Right.
I would just add to both of those are great summations, that Columbus has what's described sometimes as like an upside down T, which is where the significant disparities in the city sit. In the city sit. So if you draw a straight line that starts around Northland, goes down through Linden, and then cuts west side, going that way through Franklinton and the Hilltop, and then it cuts east side and a little bit south, down through the Near East Side, which is heavily gentrified at this point, but then the south side of Parsons Avenue and further south. That is not only areas that were historically redlined, and were forced to essentially remain heavily underdeveloped and undercapitalized, essentially because there were black and brown folks living there. But the traits of those neighborhoods have continued to experience, the people in those neighborhoods and the neighborhood as a whole has continued to experience serious disparity and disinvestment over time. And that's important to know because a lot of those neighborhoods closer to downtown right now are gentrifying, and folks who have lived in those neighborhoods are being forced out closer to the suburbs. So what we're actually seeing now is more food insecurity in the suburbs because people are forced out of the gentrifying areas, and then they need an automobile, and then they're further away from services, and they have more costs out there. So that's another interesting component of this locally.
Yeah, at least I was actually going to ask a follow-up question to you, Kareem, but maybe I'll ask that. Probably you're going to talk about this, but what is it about the way in which Columbus is growing that affects food insecurity, and how should we grow? What are we doing wrong in terms of urban farm and urban growth here? Was that
everything?
That pre-stage here?
I'll just answer really quick. I don't want to take too much time, but I mean, I think one thing that we don't talk about with all of this, and this is something that my office deals with specifically because I work in a planning office, is the issue of land use planning. We are sprawling out insanely. We are building our entire infrastructure is built around the requirement that you have to have a car to get anywhere. And if you build a city based on that, then you are condemning anybody who cannot afford a car and who requires the woefully underfunded and insufficient public transportation system in this city. You're condemning them to massive amounts of disparity across a number of spectrums. And the folks who are not going to be able to afford that entry into that are the people who already are experiencing serious discrimination across a number of different domains. So we have to do better with how we plan and develop our city in terms of just the built infrastructure of where buildings are, what the density is, who's living where, and how we make sure that we have mixed use and mixed income community.
And Kareem's an urban planner, so he's going to tell us what to do.
And of course the debate continues on all of this and how to do this in real life, in real time. And certainly I've worked with Kira and others on the panel here. But essentially correct, right? How do we plan this organism, right, that we call the city, to deliver services, right? And in this case, it's nutritious food that's available, it's affordable, it's culturally relevant. How do we do that? And it also creates, there's this space, right? We call it sort of the grocery gap, but it creates opportunity for us to think sort of creatively, and how do we fill in the gaps in a system that, from some of our perspective, has left folks behind, right? And so we sort of come up with these creative alternatives to address that. I also wanted to mention, back to the previous question, some of the people that are also food insecure are rural families, right? And certainly, for me, and when I observe this, it's sort of the cruel irony, right, where food is grown in the rural regions, but families there are still food insecure. And this connects to my project in Mansfield, Ohio. And so there's something not right. There's something that these things we need to work on, and we need to consider urban as well as rural, right, in terms of this sort of transitional, this sort of, this geography of the food system.
So, well, we'll go right to the audience. I can go on forever, but let's go to the audience. Wait, the microphone.
Kareem, I'm wondering if you could just tell us.
Start over.
Thanks so much.
Kareem, I'm sorry, but I'm wondering if you could just articulate a little bit more that idea of, in Mansfield, the growing and the production of the food, and yet they're still insecure. So the question makes me want to understand that maybe what you're saying is that there's production, but it seems to be for a market, and so it's not as maybe they're not growing from a holistic point of view to both kind of feed their own family as well as have things to bring to market. Am I right in that?
Yeah, certainly, and of course the issue is very complex, right? I teach a food systems course, and we are in the lectures right now where we're looking at the global food regime, the global food system, where food has been brought into these regions, but people are there that can farm, and so it sort of displaces them economically, right? That they're unable now to provide stable income. Another example of this that's relevant is in Kentucky. So I've done work as well in Kentucky where it's heavily tobacco being grown, a commodity crop. And after the tobacco issues has now put that in the back burner, there's a surplus of farmers and there's land. How do we transition those farmers from tobacco to food crops? And that's been a challenge, and I've done some community organizing there around that. So it's sort of this very intricate, complex web of external global factors and then local, regional sort of economic, sort of push and pull factors.
Well, to follow up on that a little bit, mostly in Ohio, in terms of food production, we grow corn and soybeans. Do we have to transform our food production? I mean, that would also, I would assume, not assume, but it'd be more sustainable to have a food production system that was more diverse and more local. But I wonder if you can comment on that. How much work we have to do there?
Yeah, there's definitely an effort, and I bet a lot of folks in this room have, seen documentaries and read a lot about just how the trends in our agriculture and how we've become less of an agricultural society over time. Extension itself is, can speak to that as well. We've gone more into big agriculture. It's not agriculture, it's monoculture. So there's not a lot of crop diversification. Most of the grain that's grown is for feed and for processed foods. So there's an effort to help diversify crops, maybe look into more specialty crops, do a bit more of a rotation, provide funding for small family farms. The other challenge there, because we are becoming less of an agricultural society, is getting young folks interested in farming. The average age of the American farmer is 67. So, what kind of 67-year-old wants to work on a farm and do that kind of hard labor, So there's some issues with succession planning as well. But we've got great movements going on in lots of our cultures and subcultures in America. So the hope is that, we bring the interest into food and farming back.
And I just want to add to that, it's not as simple as saying, okay, all these corn and soybean farmers need to now start growing fruits and vegetables. There's very specialized equipment that goes into large-scale production of corn and soybeans and those types of things. And so you can't just suddenly say, okay, I'm going to stop paying on this loan on this massive combine that I purchased to harvest soybeans and corn, and then suddenly switch over to something else. So there's that, and then the other piece of it as well is that we lack the middle supply chain infrastructure over the last, and I can speak to Columbus and Franklin counties data, but I think this is actually a common situation across the country, is that the processing for crops has moved into very centralized locations. So for example, with our farm to school, Ohio produces a tremendous amount of eggs. Our schools would love to be able to say we're using Ohio eggs. Well, all of Ohio's eggs go over to Pennsylvania for processing with eggs from other parts of the country, and by the time they come out, those are all mixed together. So you can no longer say I have Ohio eggs. So because we don't have processing for those eggs to turn them into things like pre-peeled hard-boiled eggs for schools, those types of things. Potatoes that we grow in Ohio go off to another state for processing into mashed potatoes or, oven fries for schools, those types of things. So it's not just the agriculture, it's everything in the food system.
So you're saying we're eating Michigan eggs here?
Very likely, so.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Grocery stores discard safe edible food because it's slightly expired and they can't sell it. Could that be collected and added to food banks?
I'll jump into that one. Yeah, so that's something that's actually a very active effort from our SWACO Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio. They launched a process this last year called the Central Ohio Food Waste Initiative. They've just done a new waste characterization study at the landfill, which actually is exactly what you think it is. People actually take garbage bags, dump it out, sort it, weigh it, those types of things. And the latest number that I've seen is that around 80+ million pounds of edible food enters our landfill every year. Our partners at Mid-Ohio Food Bank provide us with a statistic that about 69 million meals are missed by Franklin County residents in a single year. So we are landfilling more edible food in our community than it would take to feed our hungry neighbors. So SWACO is absolutely committed to that. So our grocery stores are actually very active in this. And so Mid-Ohio Food Bank does an amazing job of connecting local pantries to groceries for direct connection. They get donations directly into them. Kroger is probably the leader in that effort. But there are a number of other large-scale food producers that could come into that network with prepared foods. And as a matter of fact, I spent my morning before I came over here stuffing envelopes with donation guidance for our licensed food facilities to be able to say this is the type of food that can be donated. But again, it's another place where the infrastructure is lacking. So the answer to your question is yes, we want to get it there, but we lack some of the infrastructure to move that quantity.
Do other panelists want to add before I go to another?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that. So certainly Kroger, and I was on a front end sort of initiative to work with Kroger and their logistics and suppliers in terms of getting these sort of dated products back into use. Again, very complicated. There's a lot of federal guidelines in terms of what they can label the food as. Of course, Kroger is very apprehensive about having food that comes from its stores that makes someone sick a week or so later, that comes back to them. So there's a lot of back and forth there and trying to follow federal guidelines in terms of how do we make that work.
We have another question from the audience?
Hi, so I've worked in several schools that 100% of the students qualify for free lunch, and I've noticed how highly processed those lunches are in general. I'm wondering what it would take to bring the Healthy School Lunch Initiative and bring more fresh and healthy food into schools, particularly in schools where everyone has free lunch and the extreme processing of the food is what a lot of kids rely on for their meals every day.
Well, I'll take that one too. So again, what we have to think about is when you're trying to feed 53,000 students every single day, breakfast and lunch every single day. Columbus City Schools is a district that operates under community eligibility, which means their overall free and reduced lunch rate is high enough that the government allows them to just do a blanket. Every student in Columbus City Schools gets free breakfast and free lunch every day. But I want you to imagine what kind of manpower it would take and what kind of infrastructure investment it would take to use fresh potatoes to get those kids mashed potatoes for 53,000 students. And so the honest answer is it is going to take a complete overhaul of our food system to be able to make that happen, because the facilities don't have the capacity to do that. For example, The 70 elementary schools served by Columbus City Schools are they're just reheat centers. And, they've got one school that was a high school built in the early 1900s, and the kitchen where they reheat the food used to be the dressing room for the theater department. So these are the kind of things that are there. And so what is actually probably going to move the needle more, and sadly we're starting to see some, the rollbacks this last week were not as bad as what they made out to be on the news media, but we're still concerned about them, is that the rules and regulations at the USDA level for certain things drive the food manufacturers to provide the product that large districts like that need. And so I think, my honest opinion is I think we'd be hard pressed to see large districts go back to scratch on-site cooking. I just think that that's not probably feasible in the numbers that we have now. But the rules and regulations actually put it on the onus on those large-scale producers to focus on quality versus the cheapest product. So.
And yeah, Cheryl mentioned the barrier of the facilities themselves, just not having the equipment, not even a stove, maybe, a reheating center, as she says. And a lot of these meals are produced at a central facility. So, the schools, the local municipality gets a bid for a vendor, and often you have to go with the lowest bid. So you can think of how that equates to quality. Another barrier is the food budget itself at a school. A lot of times it operates independently from the school itself, right? So, and they're just barely breaking even on that, So, so the limitations with that as well. There are a lot of efforts with Farm to School to uplift some of the institutional purchasing powers, not only at the schools, but universities like this one, prisons. So hopefully we see a bit more of a shift in that.
And I will just add that in my career, I think the school districts that we've seen really engage this, the efforts that they're putting in to try and provide the best quality product in the limits that they have. I truly have never seen groups of people who are more committed to trying to think outside the box and overcome those barriers. But the barriers are very real, they're very, very big. And so I always tell folks, the challenges are real and the folks that are working on it are working really hard. But the reality of it is they need to up the budget, they need to have more money to spend on the food, and they need to have real regulations that drive the producers of those foods that they need to be able to purchase to be able to provide better things.
Excellent. Another question from the audience?
So I was actually going to mention something that Cheryl just pointed out in her comment. So not so much a question, but just sort of a call to action or tidbit that folks might not know, is that this week they did propose new USDA guidelines for federal lunch programs, relaxing the regulations that were put into place under the Obama administration. So there is a comment period, I think currently it's open for comment on the rule. I think, get my information and I can tell you if I'm wrong afterwards, but just to bring that to everybody's attention, since it's a room full of folks interested in that who are, whether you're from a policy or educational or nutritional standpoint, just to heads up on that. Thanks.
Have another question back here?
Hi, so I currently work on West Campus at the School of Environment and Natural Resources, but my background is environmental education. So just, I don't want this to be 2 questions, but it's like burning in my brain. I need to get this out. So first part of the question has to do with food and resiliency as it relates to extreme weather events, so flooding, things like that, and how the food system impacts certain groups being able to get access to food. So kind of getting your thoughts around that, and if there's things that are already happening that's kind of improving that in terms of, you mentioned senior citizens. So, be able to get food that they need during those types of events. Is that something that is being thought about? And as far as the education component, my teacher had thinking more about the chart. I don't know who had the chart that was referencing at a certain point, like it doesn't get to a certain point or past, I think it was consult, something, and after that, collaboration.
Yeah, collaborative.
Yeah.
So thinking about collaboration in terms of the importance of, not everybody's an expert at everything, but it's important to have different people working towards a bigger goal to help everyone. So can you also, anybody, speak to the importance of having people from different expertise backgrounds to solve a problem?
Thank you.
I'll say a quick word about that. I'm not sure it's answering your first question directly, but one thing we haven't mentioned today, but I think it's hanging over everything, is climate change and the issue of particularly adaptability at this point. I mean, the fact of 1.5 degrees of temperature rise is pretty much baked in at this point. That's what the science is telling us. So we're going to see the stuff that we're seeing now get worse, and specifically how it's affecting Ohio. To your point, is we're actually receiving more rain annually, but we're also experiencing more drought. And so what that means is that the rain is happening in shorter periods of time, much harder, and then droughts are happening for a long time in between that. This is really bad for growing food, for harvesting food, for essentially doing anything where you're depending on the land to be consistent and the weather to be consistent. So we have to think really, really hard about climate resiliency and adaptation. And I would love to say that local government is doing that, but I don't really think we are at this point. The City of Columbus has a climate adaptation plan, but it doesn't deal with food that much. And I personally would like to see a broad-based climate resiliency plan undertaken. And I think this goes back to Cheryl's point earlier about the middle supply infrastructure. We have a global, and to Kareem's point about the global food regime, we have a global food supply chain, and that means that if there's a climate event somewhere, or any kind of problem where one piece of that supply chain breaks down, then maybe we don't get food here. And we have potentially the outbreak of a pandemic right now in China, the early stages. If we have some kind of major event like that somewhere around the world where we're depending on food supply and the sort of inputs to the supply chain, and it doesn't happen, then what do? Where's the resiliency there? So this is why organizations like OCU Impact, and Angela Latham's in the room from OCU Impact, we have to think really hard about how to develop local food supply chains. And I mean everything from aggregation to processing to storage to distribution. All of those pieces of physical infrastructure are required if we want to think about this. Otherwise, we're just hoping that the boat arrives from across the ocean with the stuff we need, and that's a problem. So,
Does anybody want to address the second question she raised about the role of having diverse expertise and creating collaboration and empowerment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, this room, this panel is a great reflection of the need to have diversified expertise, because food system is very massive and there's so many components to it, not just growing, but also distributing, also eating, also education, also communities and how we interact with food. There's cultural components to it as well. So I think the more diversified your table is with not only knowledge but also racially, ethnically, age, the more robust your solutions are going to be related to food. So collaboration is crucial. Also, if you are working with communities, first do a scan, see what's going on already. There's a lot of duplication of services and efforts sometimes that's an unnecessary and unfortunate waste of resources. So talking to the people who are not only experiencing the food insecurity, but also service individuals who are food insecure, food pantry directors, school administrators, people who work at homeless shelters. Extremely important to make sure that you're kind of doing a scan of what's existing and working with those people rather than kind of bringing in your own solutions. So that collaboration is something that happens with people, but empowerment is really next level. So that's where you can walk away. Sometimes we as a university don't do the best job at this. When we do community-based work, is getting to that empowered piece. But it's definitely something to strive to.
And I'll just add to that, Brian is my colleague, always likes to zoom out, and I always like to zoom in. And so just to give you an example, as I described earlier, that when we work on the implementation of the local food action plan, we pull together the project teams and these ad hoc teams, and it's very much, the design and intent was very much to move us along that spectrum. Now, are we perfect at it? Do we get it right every time? Absolutely not. But everything you saw in how we work to implement the local food action plan is intended to keep helping us move in that direction. So, while I will never be the one to say we're there to do anything else, I will say that the intent and the design is put in place with that in mind.
Final comments?
Yes, quickly. So certainly in the field of planning and public policy, we use the term wicked problems. And what that means is that these issues are complex. They require knowledge, experience, lived experience from whomever is touched by these issues. And that's certainly what we have here in this panel. I've worked with everyone here and continue to work. I've had one of my classes work with Cheryl. So I think it's very important that we start thinking certainly more inclusive. And I've also been a part of thinking outside, your political jurisdictional boundaries, right? So we've pulled native growers from Belize to come here to Waterman's Farm to demonstrate how indigenous people grow corn and beans and that sort of thing. So wherever we can gather that knowledge, different methodologies, how we must open ourselves to that.
Excellent. Well, we're out of time, so that was a great note to finish our panel. Join me in thanking this excellent panel. Thank you for coming, and again, cura.osu.edu, sign up for our letter. We have an events page, newsletter events page. Don't miss anything. We're usually this high quality, so you're welcome to do that. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, you guys work quite well together.